Hello and welcome to the podcast of myself, Matt Davey, and Connor Godfrey. In this podcast, we speak to Southampton FC reporter for The Athletic, Dan Sheldon. We discuss Saints FC's progress this season, to squad depth, to are the Saints actually overachieving, as well as our all-important question, will Danny Ings sign a new contract?
You follow the games pretty closely. So far, so good?
Yeah, I don't think you can draw, probably so far so good may not do it justice. I think, they've been brilliant since the first couple of games of the season where they lost. They obviously went on a fantastic run and have continued to go on a good run. Of course, they lost to Man City. That's been their only defeat that I can remember for quite a while, which is in itself is no disgrace. It's Man City after all. And then to start the new year with a win against Liverpool. The first time Ralph Hasenhüttl's picked up any points against Jurgen Klopp in his managerial career. I think we all saw the scenes at St Mary's after the game and how much it meant to him. So if you put to one side the sort of the disappointing game against Tottenham, the poor start to the season against Palace, where really you think Southampton should be going there to look to get 3 points, just to put in a bit of a meagre performance was a bit no one really saw that coming. But Ralph was very keen to stress out that there was no pre-season. Really had only a handful of days, weeks to work with his players. There was obviously that international break just before the season started, which was incredibly awkward for all Premier League managers, not just Southampton. And of course, we saw them using a high line defensively at the start of the season, which Palace managed to exploit with Zaha on the break, and then Tottenham managed to put 5 past them in one game simply because Harry Kane and Son were just rampant on, the through ball past sort of Vestergaard, and Bednarek just tore Southampton to absolute shreds.
Saints currently sit in 6th. Do you think they're overachieving?
I think in the season where it's almost become cliche to say about this season, but if anything abnormal would happen, this would be the season to do it. I mean, look where Wolves are in the table. Look where Arsenal are in the table. I think Southampton, if I'm right, at the time of recording, are ahead of Chelsea. I know they've played a game or two more than some of these sides, but the table doesn't tend to lie. So are they overachieving? I think if you take into account how well they played in 2020 as a whole calendar year, they finished 25th. So, and ahead of Tottenham. So are they overachieving? No, they're probably sort of where they have been for the last 12 or so months. But because the table now reflects that, people may think, oh, Southampton are so high up the table, that's not normal. They must be overachieving. But when you actually take a step back and look at the whole picture, you sense, well, no, they're not overachieving. If anything, they're par for the course and they're doing brilliantly. Don't get me wrong. When they went top of the league, as nice as that was for supporters, if they're not going to finish inside the top 4 and they're not going to win the league, I mean, that would be overachieving. But from where they are now to sort of 6th to 8th, I don't think would be overachieving given their record since the turn of last year, really.
Okay, so I just want to talk about the squad. We've been blessed with good players on the South Coast for quite a while. But for you right now, is this squad the best we've had in terms of balance and depth in a long time?
Certainly since Ronald Koeman left, I'd say it's the best squad. It's the most sort of settled squad. And what I think is interesting is that some of the players that, were here under Puel, Pellegrino, Mark Hughes, they're still here. Ralph has just turned them into better players. Look at Yannick Vestergaard. He's a case in point. Everyone sort of, had lost hope in him and he was going to be the next one to probably be sold. But now he's turned into one of the Premier League's best central defenders. Now that hasn't happened overnight, and Yannick Vestergaard has always been good, but now they're playing to his strengths. So there is that case that in the strength and depth I don't think is necessarily there. I mean, if you look at the fullbacks, they've only got 2. If Walker Peters or Ryan Bertrand are out, then you're relying on Jake Vokins and Jan Valery. Now, neither of those 2 are getting anywhere near the first team. I know they're on the bench every now and then, but that's a big difference to actually being called upon week in, week out to play. Up front, they've obviously got some, very good attacking players, and there is some depth there. But Michael Obafemi is now injured, so he's going to be out for a while. Again, he wasn't obviously really anywhere near the first team, and they were quite happy for him to go out on loan. But Stuart Armstrong is a player that they can't overly rely on to stay fit through the entire season. We've already seen him injured once. Redmond is injured fairly frequently. Danny Ings, we've seen him be ruled out twice this season already with injuries. He had minor knee surgery. Theo Walcott has surprised everyone, and he's been absolutely brilliant since he came in. So I think it would be a step too far to say that this is the best squad they've had in a long time. I think if you look at that kind of Koeman squad where they finished 6th, that was brilliant. Look at the players they had in there: Graziano Pella, Sadio Mane, Dusan Tadic. These are outstanding players. Dusan Tadic was in a Champions League semi-final with Ajax. Mane's won the league, Champions League with Liverpool, and Graziano Pella, okay, he went to China, but I'm sure he did well in China, and if there was a trophy up for grabs, I'm sure his team won one. So I think you can certainly say this is the best manager they've had in that period. Whether it's the best squad, I think that's up for debate. It's a good squad. Whether it's the best squad, I'm not so sure.
Just to carry on about the squad, you mentioned Danny Ings there. Do you think that this team is too reliant on Danny Ings?
Well, I remember I did a piece for The Athletic at the start of the season, almost saying they are too reliant on Danny Ings, and then ever since then they've proven me wrong. And I'm happy for that to be the case. I've done a piece, funnily enough, I filed it earlier today, talking about how in the last 5 games, Southampton have scored 2 goals. In the 5 before that, they scored 10. In the 5 before that, they scored 12. So there has been a significant drop-off in those, over those 15 games to now they've gone 5 games with just 2 goals. And what part of that is, and if you're into XG and all of that, which I must admit I'm not really, but since starting at The Athletic, you kind of have to show it some interest. Southampton are the most efficient team in attack. I think their XG is sort of like 17.7 or 17.8 for the 20, and they scored 26 goals. However, you look at those goals in isolation. For example, Danny Ings' goal against Liverpool. How many times out of 10 is Danny Ings going to score that goal without, he didn't even look at the goal. He just hit the ball. It was just such a natural finish. How many times is he going to take those half chances? You can't rely on James Ward-Prowse to score you a free kick all the time. Shay Adams' goals have, they dried up. He started the season obviously really well, making assists, scoring goals, brilliant, selfless player. And then you're looking below that, Yannick Vestergaard, you've relied on him for 3 goals. So although the goals are coming from more places than Danny Ings, I don't think they're any more too reliant on Danny Ings, but especially over Christmas, I'm sure supporters would have noticed that the attacking sort of quartet, they just lacked that bit of spark, that little bit of creativity. It looked slow. I remember the Fulham game, it was just a poor game against Fulham. West Ham wasn't that much better. And then, of course, we saw at Liverpool that they were good going forward and they were even better at the back. So it's really tough because, of course, Danny Ings is such a brilliant player. You don't mind being too reliant on him. And if I was to kind of break it down in like a percentage, I'd probably say there's sort of 65, 70% reliant on Danny Ings. But when you've got someone that good and the other players are scoring, which they haven't been recently, which is where there's a problem, then it's okay. If you've got one guy scoring all the time, that's fine. But as long as you've also got other players scoring beneath him, then that, of course, is good, because if Danny Ings is ruled out for a sustained length of time, the first question is, where are the goals coming from? But if you go week to week and it's not always Danny Ings scoring the goals, it's like Prowse, or you've got Vestergaard, or Shay Adams will get one, or Moussa Djenepo will get one, then that's when there's nothing to worry about. So to kind of, in a non-answer, really, they're not too reliant on Danny Ings, but it wouldn't be too much of an issue if they were.
So the $1 million question really is Danny Ings going to sign a new contract? And I guess the same could be said for Ryan Bertrand.
Yeah, well, I guess the only 2 people that will know the answers to that are Danny Ings and Ryan Bertrand. I hear all different things said about Danny Ings' contract. It's obviously a delicate situation. I think the club realise it's a delicate situation. This is their star player, and you could be going into the summer where he's got a year left on his contract. Now, this is probably the question I get asked most about, and it's always the one I have to kind of give a really poor answer to, because I have to protect my sources. I could speak quite a lot about what I know is going on behind the scenes, but then that compromises the people I speak to, and I can't do that. So what I do is I just say the facts. Southampton have offered him a contract that would see him become their highest earning player. This is Danny Ings. And that offer's on the table when it hasn't been signed yet. So why hasn't it been signed? Does Danny Ings think he can play for, I don't know, go back to a big club? Does he think that, a Man City might come in for him? Maybe they might, maybe they won't. Is that something that's holding his contract up? If you're Danny Ings, do you sign a contract that with your injury record and your age, he's 28, so if he signs, let's say, a 4-year deal, is a Man United going to want to pay 85 million pound on a player that has had 2 ACL injuries and will have absolutely no sell-on value whatsoever? The answer is no, they won't. But will a Man United take let's say he gets to the summer and he's got 1 year left and he's not going to sign a contract, and let's say United pay 30 million pounds for Danny Ings, for a striker that can come in and do a job and he's going to score you goals? United have got that money to spend, so yeah, they absolutely would. I'd imagine it's a good option. He's an England international and he's fantastic. His work rate is fantastic. Everything about Danny as a footballer is brilliant, and he's a brilliant guy as well. So they're the kind of dilemmas that you've got that make it a bit more nuanced than just will he sign, won't he sign. There's all of these factors to consider, and both for the club to consider. If they want him to sign, but Danny, let's say, may have ambitions to go to another club, or how do you meet in the middle? Where's the compromise? Is that where a release clause may come in? Do you say to Danny, look, if you sign a 4-year deal, that protects you as our asset, but we'll also put this clause in there. That means if, let's say, your preferred destination, if he has a preferred destination, he might want to stay anyway. If they come in and offer us this money, we'll shake your hand and we'll let you go. Is that what it is? Will it take that to get the deal over the line? There's so many kind of different factors that are at hand, and I hope I've been able to explain them in a way that present it more than just will he sign, won't he sign. Ryan Bertrand, I think, is a lot different to the Danny situation. Ryan Bertrand can negotiate with a club overseas now, so he can sign a pre-contract with LA Galaxy in America, for example. Now, I don't know if LA Galaxy are interested. I've just plucked them out of a hat. There's nothing in that whatsoever. Nothing stopping him doing that. He's out of contract in the summer. So with Ryan, what I think is going on, and admittedly, perhaps to my own detriment, I'm spending a lot more time making calls about the Danny Ings contract because that is a much bigger story. What I may put Ryan down to as to why this is taking some time is, you look at Ryan, he's 31 years old. What type of length contract will he want? And will Southampton want to offer him that? If Ryan, for example, might want 3 years, does Southampton want to offer him 3 years? They might want to offer him 2 years, but Ryan might not want 2 years. He wants 3 years. So how do you meet in the middle? These are all the things, the talks that I imagine are definitely going on behind the scenes. But Ryan came out recently after one of the games and said that he hopes to stay at Southampton for a long time. And we know of his ambition to kind of go into a business role upon retirement. He said he's not really too interested in coaching, but he does have ambitions to be a director of football type. We know he's a big admirer of the City Football Group and how they're, branching out and expanding their network of clubs. So that definitely interests him. It's just a case of he's still a very good player. It's how do you keep Ryan Bertrand motivated? At the moment, he's got that kind of carrot of a new contract dangling over his head. If he signs that contract, which I don't think he will, and I'm saying I don't think he will, I need to reword this one. If he signs that contract, which he may, and I don't think he will do this, but will he then drop off? Will he drop that kind of 5-10%, which in the Premier League makes all the difference? You only need to be off your game by 5%, and that's enough for everyone to notice. Now, from what we've seen, Ryan isn't really, you don't be at the level he is at. He's England international, he's won the Champions League by having a bad attitude. He doesn't strike me as that character. I've interviewed him a handful of times. He's a really engaging talker. He's very switched on, very intelligent. So I'm sure with that, it's probably just coming down to how long they offer him. We saw Shane Long, who's 33, get a 2-year contract. Well, in hindsight, would you give Shane Long a 2-year contract now? Southampton play a completely different way that doesn't suit him. You probably don't give him a 2-year contract. So these are all the things that they undoubtedly have to be weighing up. There's so much more to it than just will they, won't they sign. So sorry, I can't answer the $1 million question, but if I could, then I'm sure I'd be rich as well.
Just want to go back to Ralph Hasenhüttl. You mentioned earlier that he, the squad perhaps isn't the best we've had, or, it's subjective. But you said that Ralph Hasenhüttl probably was the best manager we've had in a long time. How do you think he compares to the likes of Puel, Pellegrino, and the managers since Koeman, or including Koeman as well? Because obviously he's had success recently, but obviously under Hasenhüttl you had the Leicester issue, we'll call it that. So how do you think he compares?
I think Koeman, on paper, you look at Koeman and you think the where they finished in the league, the record points total. Ralph hasn't matched that yet. But then you look at Ronald's side and look at the team Ronald had, and you think, well, if Ralph was in charge of that team, could they have done better? Maybe they could have. And Puel, I'm not a Southampton fan, so I can look at that season and think they got to a League Cup final when they finished 8th. What's the problem? Well, it was tedious football. In a world where personalities and charisma and character are everything, Puel was a bit more reserved. We saw Ralph get stick for the emotion he displayed after the Liverpool game. But then Puel got stick for not showing that emotion. So where do you draw the line? I think Puel is a very good manager. I just don't think he could capture the imagination in a way that Ralph has. Pellegrino was clearly a mistake. Mark Hughes came in with a remit to keep them in the Premier League. He did that, and that should have been that. They sort of shook his hand and said, thank you, Mark. Here's a bonus or whatever. And then gone for Ralph, if Ralph was an option. They didn't just pluck Ralph out of the sky. They were looking at Ralph for a very long time. So that's when they should have been good enough to say, right, okay, thank you, Mark, but we're going in a new direction now. So Mark, the start to that 2018-19 season was obviously abysmal, but he does deserve credit for keeping them up by the skin of their teeth. But what Ralph has done is he's taken a group of players who had no confidence, who were, perennial relegation battlers, into a team that is now contesting for Europe. And he's done that by good old-fashioned coaching. I get sick of that Leicester game, as I'm sure everyone does now. But you look at that and you look at the squad that started that game and you look who's playing now. Of course, some of the players aren't here. Yoshida's gone, but a lot of the core of that squad is exactly the same. And he's made them better by coaching. And that is what he's paid to do that, but not every manager can do that. We've seen Ralph isn't a checkbook manager. Okay, the money's not there for him to spend £200 million every summer, but he likes young players who he can make better. Look at Kyle Walker-Peters. Look how good he's been this season. That alone is an example of Ralph's coaching. Look at James Ward-Prowse. When Ralph came in, Ralph didn't really fancy James Ward-Prowse, but he spent time with him. He invested his time in Prowse, and now he's his club captain. You could name so many players that Ralph has done that with. Oriol Romeu. I love Oriol Romeu. I think he's a class act on and off the pitch. Really good player, but he's taken his game up a level, and that's because of Ralph's coaching. So I honestly think I didn't really cover Southampton at the time Ronald was there. So I won't know too much about what he was like coaching, but obviously Pochettino is a fantastic coach who came before Ronald. But in terms of Ronald, I don't know whether he was one to let his assistants kind of do it, and he was the big name manager who would just take the leading role, basically. Let's coaches do the training, but I'm the leading authority here. Whereas Ralph is 100%, balls to the wall type manager. He is just relentless. Every day is a day where his players can get better. So it's really difficult to answer that question because, like I say, I don't have the experience of covering Southampton under Koeman. But what I can say is, on paper, Koeman's teams performed better than Ralph's did when it got to the end of the season and the table was over. But then at that time, it was a top 4. It wasn't a top 6. So is it now harder to get into that top bracket? Look at the teams that were Arsenal. Arsenal are in the bottom half of the table. I'm sure Arsenal were in the bottom half of the table in sort of 2014-15 and 2015-16. So there are so many kind of external factors to to that. But this is certainly, in my opinion, without doubt, the best coach they've had since Koeman left. I mean, I know that sitting on the fence and saying the obvious, but without knowing what Koeman was like too much, it would be hard to say he's better than him.
So with the way things are going, how much longer realistically can Saints actually keep hold of Hasenhüttl?
Well, one thing, he's signed a 4-year contract. Southampton can keep hold of Ralph as long as they keep on matching Ralph's ambition. Ralph doesn't want to be ever going backwards. He only wants to be going forwards. I think for now, we've seen the kind of Chelsea links. That's fairly tenuous. Ralph wouldn't be interested in that job now. But 2 years down the line, would Ralph be interested in that job if Southampton are still kind of where they are? They've not backed him in a way that he may want to be backed. So it's, no Southampton fan wants to really see him go because they're enjoying this crazy, brilliant spell they're under. But there will come a day where he will leave because it's evident for everyone he is just a fantastic manager, and fantastic managers will rise to the top. But what Ralph has got at Southampton, which also works in the club's favour when it comes to other clubs maybe looking at him, is if Ralph, let's use Chelsea as the example, went to Chelsea, he just becomes a small cog in a machine. That is it. He gets told, he is basically told not what to do, but if he wanted to go to whoever runs the academy at Chelsea and say, right, this is how I want all the kids playing, they're going to be like, no, that doesn't work here. You fit into our system. At Southampton, he's been able to change the club from bottom upwards, basically, in terms of the academy. We've seen with the SFC playbook, where all the academy sides are now playing the way that Ralph is getting the first team to play. Now, that, of course, makes absolute sense, because why wouldn't you get the players playing that way so when they get to the first team, they're ready for it? Would he get that freedom at Chelsea? No. Would he get to spend money at Chelsea? Well, we'd have money, but how much of it will be spent on the players he wants and how much of it will be spent on the players that the club want? You only got to look at Frank Lampard this summer. Would he really have signed all of those players in the attacking department? Probably not. And then you're left with a headache because you're under pressure to play these players and they're not performing week in, week out. So he's come to the Premier League for a challenge. He wanted to prove himself against the best managers. He's doing that. And Southampton are moving forward. So all the time they're moving forward and Ralph is still enjoying that, I don't really see a world where he goes. What I think the problem will be is that if he gets them into Europe this year and then he stays next year and they do well in Europe, I don't know, let's say they reach the quarterfinals of the Europa League or something like that. At that point, then it becomes impossible for clubs to ignore him. And then it comes down to whether Ralph wants to make that move, because undoubtedly a job will come up and he will be top of the list for a lot of clubs in the Premier League if he has managed to do that at Southampton for kind of 2.5, 3 seasons. He's taken them into Europe. I mean, he's already managed in the Champions League with RB Leipzig. So that is where I envisage a problem coming, is not now, but maybe in 18 months' time. But Southampton are a long way from that at the moment. So I think they're fine with Ralph, and I'm sure he's happy there too.
So, final question. What is the realistic expectation for Saints this season? I mean, obviously, we'd love to get Champions League football. But for you as someone covering them, what do you think will happen? What is our realistic ambition?
I don't think they're finishing the top 4. As much as I'd love them to finish in the Champions League places, because then it would mean I get to go on a Champions League tour myself if the world looks in a different place this time sort of next year. 6th, I think they'll have to do well to finish where they are, but they absolutely can, because as I've already explained, this is just a weird season and it's all going to be down to momentum. If you can kind of string 3 or 4 wins in a row, or like Southampton have, where they've not lost, I think they've lost 1 game in maybe 7 or 8 or 6 matches or something like that, then that's going to put you in fantastic stead. However, are Chelsea going to keep on underperforming? Probably not. They will eventually hit that form that they found at the start of the season and they will go on a run themselves. So if I was a fan, and from kind of my own hat as well, I'd be disappointed if Southampton finish outside of the top 8. If they finish 8th, I think Southampton fans at the start of the season would have snapped your hand off at that, because that's progression. They finished 11th last year. You could even say if they finished 10th, it's a good season, and it would be a good season because last year they still had that kind of threat of relegation for the first two or three months. This year they've not had that whatsoever. So that in itself is progress. But just because of how well they have started this year and the points they've accumulated and the teams they've beaten, I would personally be disappointed if they're finishing below 8th.